Good morning. My name is Joseph Donaldson, and I'm an associate professor and extension specialist at NC State. I also serve as director of undergraduate programs and coordinate the extension education minor. I would like to welcome you to the 2023 Seaman A. Knapp Seminar. I would like to offer special thanks to the Seaman A. Knapp Seminar Committee members for their efforts to make today's program possible. Dr. J. Gerotny, please stand, Dr. J. Gerotny. Also Dr. Shannon Arnold, Dr. Donna Graham, Dr. Rama Radhakrishna, and Dr. Lisa Taylor. And all of them sent their regrets that they could not be here this morning. Oh, Shannon, there you are. Oh. Shannon, please stand up. Okay. Well, you know, there's that philosopher, Marshall Rogers, who says, please stand back. So I had to try. Let's give it up for Shannon. I'm so sorry I overlooked you. I also would like to recognize the efforts of Jillian, because Jillian is our videographer for today, and many extension scholars will be able to benefit from this lecture as we will be able to post this online for everyone to enjoy. Today, we celebrate Seaman Knapp's legacy as the father of extension. We celebrate his legacy of applying science to agriculture. We celebrate his legacy of recognizing hard work and pride in the study of food, agriculture, natural resources, and human sciences. We celebrate his legacy and the founding of the farm demonstration method. We celebrate his legacy and the way that he advocated for research to inform both academic and extension programs. We celebrate his legacy and the ways he supported the community, not only as an extension scholar and educator, but as a minister and a school teacher. We celebrate his legacy and the scholarship that he inspired through such publications as the Farmer's Journal. We celebrate the legacy of Seaman A. Knapp and all of the ways that he advocated for rural communities and helping families succeed. We celebrate Knapp's legacy because he believed that the pursuit of happiness and liberty included the option to rise above subsistence farming, if that's what you wanted to do. One of his most often quoted remarks has inspired generations of extension professionals. Many of you can quote it by heart. Your mission is to solve the problems of poverty, to increase the measures of happiness, and to harness the forces of all learning to the useful and needful in human society. Today's seminar is a perfect celebration of Knapp's life and work because he was a lifelong learner who advocated for lifelong learning throughout all of society. I am pleased to introduce our distinguished speaker for the 2023 Knapp Seminar, Dr. Benjamin Chapman. He serves as Department Head of Agricultural and Human Sciences, Professor and Director of the Safe Plates Food Safety Extension and Research Program at North Carolina State University. With the goal of reducing foodborne illness, his group researches food handling and food safety systems, designs and implements food safety strategies, and evaluates messages and media from farm to fork. Ben also hosts 2 podcasts. I encourage you to check those out, Food Safety Talk and Risky or Not. He is a graduate of the University of Guelph in Guelph, Ontario. You may have heard in Canada they play a little hockey, and he is a hockey fan, and he supports the Toronto Maple Leafs and their 13 championships. And he is also a fan of good 70s music, such as Neil Young. And for those of you who are much younger than myself, Neil Young totally rocked it out in the 70s. Will you please I also wanted to share his seminar topic, Lessons Learned from the Pandemic, Future Direction of Extension Education Development and Delivery in the Changing Landscape of Information. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Benjamin Chapman.
Joseph, thank you so much for the introduction. Sometimes you never know what kind of intro you're going to get. When you get something as personal as hockey and Neil Young, it pretty much nails who I am. So I appreciate that. Quick fact, I have two kids, one who's 14 and one who's 12. And the 14-year-old's middle name is Neil. Not after a family name, very much after Canada's greatest rock and roll person. And actually, my other son, my second son, his middle name is Griffin, who's named after the mascot of the University of Guelph. So there you go. Joseph nailed both my kids in the intro today. So I want to, I guess, give you first of all, I just want to thank the organizers here today for inviting me and really just allowing me to take the stage today to talk about my experiences and give you a little bit of history on how I got to really to NC State University in the world of extension. But also, I think it's very fitting, and I'm humbled to be part of the Seaman Knapp lecture today, because Seaman Knapp very much embodies exactly what I think I do, or what I try to do in my world. As Joseph mentioned, I come from Canada. Gosh, it's gonna be like super cliche today. Hockey, Neil Young. I'm sure I'll say A few times. My accent will appear. But in Canada, as much as there is a world of extension, it doesn't look like the land grant system here in the U.S. And so I specifically came here to a land grant institution to do this work. My background, give me my Marvel origin story, by the way. There's a picture of the University of Guelph. I did 3 degrees at this institution. My undergraduate degree is in molecular biology and genetics. I'm a lab scientist, I guess, by training, although that happened in the mid to late 90s, and none of the techniques that I learned are still, we don't do any of it. We were learning about the concept of PCR, and now people can do it in their homes. And so it kind of dates you a little bit when you think about it. But I guess the other thing I want to share is, growing up, I grew up in Southern Ontario. I'm from Toronto originally. My family's from the city, legit, 4 generations in downtown Toronto. My parents didn't learn how to drive until they were 30, because we had public transportation, they didn't need to. And so my family view of the world of agriculture, and I'll even say rural Canada, and certainly rural America, was very limited. I grew up at 9 years old, jumping on a subway and taking it to my friend's house. And I grew up in a really urban area with lots of different, lots of diversity, people from different backgrounds. My parents moved to the suburbs when I was in high school, and we kind of got to a town that's the interface of urban and rural Ontario. And so that was my first taste of agriculture. And I was 14 years old before, and obviously I'd seen farms before, but I was 14 years old before I had a friend who asked me to come out to her farm and help her hay. And I didn't know how to drive, and so I'm driving a car and a tractor. And anyway, my high school background was all about biology, all about genetics, really interested in that world, and never really knew anything about the world of agriculture, and certainly didn't know anything about extension. It just wasn't part of my makeup. I went to this great college in Guelph, Ontario, did a four-year degree in molecular biology and genetics, and I thought I was really interested in human genetics. I thought that I was really interested in sort of the medical aspect of genetic diseases, but when I got there, I ended up taking a series of classes in animal genetics and plant genetics, and really found myself very much focused on the world of like plant breeding. And I'm, again, not certainly a gardener and didn't grow up in that, in any sort of agriculture, but there's something that drew me to just like the science of how quickly generations change with plants, because it's so much faster than other systems. And then I learned a lot about microbiology, and that system of like generations got even faster. Now we're talking about hours as opposed to years. And so I did 2 other degrees, both in the world of food safety, and so in the College of the Ontario Agriculture College, and then just really started understanding where food comes from and really the trade-offs that exist at so many different levels within the system. So I started as an undergraduate research assistant with a professor. His name's Doug Powell. He retired a little bit ago due to some health issues, but he was one of the, I guess, pioneers of pushing risk communication through the lens of food and food safety and agricultural technology. And so I'm going to take you back again, maybe not as old as Joseph thinks I am, but back to the late 90s, and this is before certainly Google, but what our lab did was collect information. Collected information that was very specific to the world of agriculture, animal agriculture, plant agriculture, agricultural technology, and food safety, and then distributed that information to decision makers, right? And literally everything that Google Alerts does today was what we did by hand for about 8 years, creating listservs and newsletters, and then conducting research on how people use that information. And decision makers, what do I mean by that? Anybody from truthfully, the Commissioner of Agriculture in North Dakota is a subscriber to top government officials in Ontario, the WHO, but then also like someone who ran a restaurant, who was integrated into food and farming systems. And so these newsletters were, the subscriber base in about 2003 was right around 14,000 people. And so every day they'd get this information. We would do media analysis, content analysis, we could talk about trends, and then we'd understand how people use this information. Right in the middle of when I started this in 2001, I was, again, I didn't know anything about what I wanted to do. I just really wanted to find a job that kept me in Guelph so I could like party with my friends. Like, I mean, literally, that was my absolute goal. And so I, 5 a.m. every morning, I'd get on my bike and I'd ride into our lab, which is a series of computers, and we went through news clippings and newspapers. And 3 weeks after I started, and part of my job was to read this stuff, digest it, and then sort it. And again, like all of the things that Google does now for you. Right 3 weeks after that happened, an outbreak of E. coli 157H7 happened in the town of Walkerton, Ontario. So real, very, very rural town, 2 hours north of Toronto, 2.5 hours north of Toronto, farming community, largely beef and dairy, and some row crops in this area. Water system got contaminated, the municipal water system got contaminated with E. coli 157H7 due to runoff from animal manure from a dairy farm. 7 people died, 3,000 out of the 6,000 people that lived in that town got sick. The long-term health impacts associated with this outbreak are an international case study on what happens when people get exposed to pathogens and don't know about it. This all happened at a time for me that was really formative because I was like, man, this is, like, I know people from this town. I mean, I played baseball with 4 guys who, like, their families were sick. They were also at the University of Guelph. And so I knew people, it connected with me. I was learning about genetics and microbiology, but now all of a sudden I had an actual tangible output, like that people get sick. And what was really fascinating for me and what really drew me into the world of extension, and I'll talk about it like extension here, but I think outside of the US, we talk about it as outreach or public education or really try to do behavior change work. But what really drew me in was how little was known about the pathogen and why it happened. And then I'll tell you from someone who grew up in a city, not in the back, seeing anything about agriculture, how quickly things changed to, well, this is agriculture that caused this. And being in an agricultural college, having a lot of faculty around me who did grow up in areas where they were surrounded by this world, things got really, really personal. So it's not as simple as agriculture caused this, and there's actually a lot of bad players in this, most of them within the water system. There were 2 brothers who ran the municipal water system. They falsified a bunch of records, had no idea how much chlorine was ever in their water system, sometimes put it in, sometimes didn't. There's a big, big inquiry in this that the Canadian government put really, really focused on. But absolutely the source of the pathogen genetically was linked to this dairy farm. And it was a dairy farmer who my professor knew from work that he was doing, so someone who was known within the agricultural world. It really started nutrient management plans in Ontario because it wasn't a thing that we really had a big focus on at the time. But it really motivated me and I guess inspired me to learn more about how people get information, why we make decisions that we make, how can I, as a scientist, be a better part of this. I think at one point when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I thought I was going to be a science teacher, like a high school science teacher. We don't have agriculture teachers in Ontario. And then the more and more I got into this, I thought there actually might be like a career that I could do different things as opposed to just in the classroom. Not that that's a bad thing at all. I was looking for more, and I ended up really focusing my interest in creating 2 degrees around learning the world of extension around food safety. Okay, so I've got a few I guess putting these slides together for me were really cathartic, I guess. When Joseph and Jay asked me to do this lecture, I was like, this is my first time coming to AAAE. I don't know who's going to be in the room. I know the world of food safety pretty well. What are you expecting? And Joseph and I talked a little bit back and forth about it. I was like, tell the story about what you've learned and what you've experienced. And so it was reflecting a little bit on my career and then really what the last 3 years have been about. I came up with some some thoughts about things that I've learned throughout my career that I want to share with you. So one thing was when I moved from the world of molecular biology to the world of food safety, I had a mentor, a guy named Gord Surgener. He recently retired as well, also from the University of Guelph, but he was an entomologist. And he told me a story in one of my committee meetings about what extension was. And we're just like sitting around, and I was like, I don't get it. Like, what do you mean? Like, what is this world? He goes, well, he went to the University of Guelph for his undergraduate, then he went to Michigan State. And he explained to me what the land grant system was. I was like, we don't have that in Canada. He goes, no, it doesn't. It's not anything like that at all. But his background was in mosquitoes and mosquito control. And he wanted to come back to Ontario as a faculty member. And he told me he got this job, knew nothing about entomology as it relates to agriculture. again, really like me, grew up in the city. And he had a mentor in his department who said to him, if you really want to be successful in this world and make a difference for the stakeholders that really tax dollars are paying for you to help, you need to get to know who they are. Like, you need to actually know what their challenges are, know how they act, what are they dealing with on a daily basis. And so Gord took that to heart and told me what he did is he spent the first 6 months of his faculty position living on various farms in Ontario, learning about dairy production, learning about crops, and meeting families and trying to figure out what they were doing. He was supported by his department to do this, and so that was a lesson that he said to me that I've really taken through everything that I do in my career. Is it's really hard to figure out solutions if you don't really understand what the system is. And I don't know how many of you were here yesterday for Ray Starling and Andy Curlis's talk. Ray talks a lot about outsiders and insiders as it relates to agriculture, and I'm, full disclosure, total outsider. I think I consider myself a little more of an insider now, 20 plus years into this, but I didn't know anything about it, and I was, I guess, humble enough to be like, I need to learn about it. Gord said kind of the same thing. And so he also told me, you need to know what they do and figure out what competes with the thing that you want them to do, right? And for me, that's about controlling pathogens. In my world as a food safety specialist, for him, it was about these trade-offs of really crop management and livestock management, and there are costs involved with this. So that's, I guess, a tenet of one of the things that I try to take forward. So it started for me when I was doing my master's degree. I worked with agriculture, greenhouse production. Greenhouse production in Southwest Ontario is a big deal because it's cold all the time. And we can grow things outside for like 2 months. So if you build a lot of glass and plastic, you can grow tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, lettuce all year long. It takes a lot of energy to do that, but it also kind of changes the quality of the product that you put out in a really good way. You can charge a premium. So if you go to, most anywhere on the East Coast to the Midwest in a grocery store, you see like little cluster tomatoes or cherry tomatoes that say product of Canada on them. And really, if you look close, about 60% of the ones you find in a grocery store do. They come from this little town, Leamington, Ontario. The history of Leamington, Italian immigrants came over to Canada following World War II, really good at tomato production. Got really, really good, so good that Heinz built a plant in Leamington for processing tomatoes. And then in about 1980, 10 farmers, along with a specialist at the University of Guelph and an extension person from our Ministry of Agriculture in Ontario, took a trip to Israel to look at greenhouse production. And they came back and said, we can do this here, and built really what is right now almost like a $400 million annual industry. And 6,000 people live in this town. And they all grow greenhouse tomatoes. When I worked with the industry, my job was to help them understand what their food safety issues were. Food safety, things that another thing I didn't put a slide in this, but one of the things that I've learned over my career, and it does matter from an extension standpoint, I think, food safety largely comes down to trade. It's all about markets and trade. And it's really bad business to make people sick, first of all, right? But if you are an exporting or importing country, it's some product, well, let's say you're an exporting country, some product that you ship to, I don't know, the world's largest market, which is about 30 kilometers, or I did that in kilometers because I happen to be talking Canadian right now. But let's say that's 60 miles away, which is how far Leamington is from the US border. If you ship products that lead to an outbreak, the door closes for all the exports. So the motivation for the industry was, do we have salmonella? That was the question. they don't know. So are we making people sick? We should probably figure this out. So I spent better course of 3 years going into greenhouses, taking samples, reviewing practices, coming up with recommendations on food safety, and really trying to figure out whether they had salmonella. And the real answer is a little bit, not much. And compared to what is grown in the U.S., about the same. We know now from the literature that's out there. But what really drove me, I thought I was doing a microbiology project. I thought that my master's degree was how much salmonella is on tomatoes and where does it come from. And what it turned out to be was an extension project, because when I worked with the producers, they weren't just interested in whether they had it. They wanted to know if they didn't, why. What could they be doing better to make sure that they're continuing to keep these pathogens off their tomatoes? If they did have it, they really wanted to know why and what we could do. And that's where it came back to me and really hit from what my mentor said was, well, you now understand a little bit about what they're dealing with. Now it's your job to go out and try to help them and create some solutions for them. And so I felt really proud to be able to work with that industry. Again, city guy. I went to 400 different greenhouses over the course of my project multiple times. And that translated into another world for me, which was tree fruits. So I got to actually go outside during the summer, as opposed to the greenhouses, and did the same thing in Southwest Ontario, or Southern Ontario. There's peaches, cherries, pears. Those would be plums. Those would be the big ones. But similar issues when it came to food safety. And so I spent a lot of time on farms, spent a lot of time talking to farmers, spent a lot of time helping them understand the concept of risk and what they can do to control risk. And that's really where I cut my teeth in the world of extension. And then moved a little bit. And so I'm a food guy. I would kind of define myself as not agriculture and not culinary food, but I'm a food system person. I'm really interested in from planting or from technology all the way through to when consumers make decisions in their home as they're preparing food. And so I didn't know a whole lot about the other end of the spectrum. So during my PhD, I looked at restaurants. And the central question that I wanted to ask, which became kind of a jumping off point for my career, is what do people do in restaurants when the inspector's not there? And it started, actually spent time, I know there's some folks from Michigan State here. I spent 5 months during my PhD in Manhattan, Kansas, working with local health inspectors there because we had a collaboration. And interviewing inspectors, interviewing restaurant operators, asking them that central question. First of all, as an inspector, do you think when you're not here they're doing this all the time? And resoundingly they're like, no. I don't think that they're doing it all the time. Because I come back in and it's all stuff that I saw before that I told them to correct. Then I asked restaurant operators, you doing stuff differently? They're like, yeah, absolutely, we're doing stuff differently when the inspector's not here. And one guy, 2 things popped out to me from that work that I still take away that had to do with me learning this system and understanding so I could better serve it. One restaurant operator, Manhattan, Kansas, told me, when the inspector comes, I work here all the time. I tell all of my staff to go on lunch. I don't trust them. I don't trust that my employees will do things right all the time. So I'm going to change the system. I'm going to control it all because I don't care who's here eating. It's going to be slow. It's going to be real slow because I'm taking orders and I'm cooking it, and there's no one else here. So that was one thing that I didn't know about until I was in the system. Another thing that I took away from that was another guy, and again, this kind of for me gave me an understanding of some of the challenges that we all face in the world of extension education, and that's belief and why. And so for me, I come from this public health background, right? If you eat food that has a pathogen on it. It's not always going to make you sick, but it can make you sick. And if it does, sometimes it can be real bad. And just like give you numbers, in the US, we're talking about 48 million cases of foodborne illness a year. It's like sizable. Economically, it's about $170 billion just in healthcare costs and lost productivity. So there's real money that's involved in this. On a very local level though, and I'll never forget this interview that I had, an operator told me, it's not a big deal. I really don't care about food safety. What do? Owe them some toilet paper if they get sick? I was like, oh, I don't not want to eat at your restaurant. But going back to that, I guess, tenet that Gord told me, you need to know what people are, where they're at, and being able to understand that if you ever want to do anything related to education with them, you got to know what the learner's up to. Okay, so let me fast forward a little bit. Joseph mentioned research that we do. Just going to spend a couple of seconds showing you some pictures on this. We do a lot, and in fact, where I focus my work is not just asking people what they do, but watching what they do. We do a lot of observational studies. We do observational studies in the field. We put up video cameras all over the place. We interview people afterwards. We do a lot of coding. Now, just thinking about, I'll tell you, like where things are going post-pandemic. We're working with two groups that are interested in using AI to code thousands of hours of videos to be able to understand where a product moves, how hands are washed in all different settings, agriculture, food systems. So things that we couldn't do before, AI has really, and the promise of AI has at least gotten us very excited. It's not there quite yet, but we're working with two groups to train systems on this based on some of the videos that we generate. Some of the things, I guess, like I'll talk about keeping the my Neil Young theme here. Some of the greatest hits, I would say, from us in our lab is don't wash your chicken. If you ever saw anything that CDC put out about not washing chicken, that's based on work that we did here in Raleigh, where we brought in about 600 consumers who self-declared chicken washing. And that sounds like a totally derogatory term when you say it like that. But we wanted to know, if people wash their chicken, what does that mean? How do they wash it? Where do pathogens go? And the work that we did on behalf of the federal government ended up leading to a number of public health campaigns from CDC and FSIS. And so for me, again, I really want to know what people do to change those behaviors and utilize that for education and extension work. Just to give you a sense, in the last 5 years, we conduct somewhere in between 300 and 400 observations a year. I'll show you some pictures here in a second. We built kitchens to do this. And those kitchens, there's 3 kitchens that are outfit with 8 different camera angles where we can also do microbiology and bring people in and really get a sense of what they would do in a simulated system. I say that because we know there's limitations, right? What people do in their own home versus what they do when they're in a simulated system are different. But we still see a lot of stuff. Recently, over the last 5 years, looked at almost 3,000 hours of video of food preparation. But I will say that the big ones for me here are, we're really interested in hand washing. And again, I'm going to get into the pandemic and hand washing here in a second. But in the work that we've done, we've seen times where about 7,000 times where people should have washed their hands. And we saw 83 successful hand washing events. What makes a successful hand washing event? What does that mean? Because you got to have some science, right? Well, FDA, CDC, USDA say that these are the things that matter. You have to wet your hands with water, you have to add soap, you have to lather, you've got to rinse, you've got to dry. Those 5 steps make a successful hand washing step. There are lots of people that try that. Yes?
Does the time count?
Good question. Time. So, time, technically, from the government standpoint counts, from a science standpoint, does not count at all.
Huh.
The more, so in fact, we just published a paper about a year ago that demonstrated the more that people try to wash their hands matters more than how long they wash their hands for. Because every unsuccessful event, if they try, they're gonna remove something. Nothing, and I guess this isn't on a slide here, but hand washing is not magical. Not, like, you can remove 99% of what's on your hands from a hand wash event. You do 2 of them, now you can remove 99.99%. That's it. You do 3, you can get another 2 factors, 2 log factors. But all of those aspects, lather, soap, rinse, they all play into it. So if you skip one of those steps, you're still going to accomplish something. And so for us, understanding that really, really matters, especially as it comes to the pandemic. Different pathogen, similar approach. But anyway, so we do this work to support the extension work that we do, because if we know how people don't do it or do it, then we can better build messages. All right, so just some pictures. This is what our kitchens look like. We observe people in real time. You can't probably see this, but we can actually watch when people are doing stuff, look for triggers that we see as a behavior, and then better ask them about post-interview. I won't go too much into this today. We've also done, that's me with Google glasses on. We also do a bunch of eye tracking as well. Again, to help understand where people look at things and how they interact with food products. We don't just do this with consumers, we do this with restaurant employees. We've done some eye tracking work with producers as well, on how they look at labels, especially when it comes to pesticide labels and any of the chemicals that they're using. What are the things that are drawing their eyes there so that we can better build extension messages?
Ben,
yeah.
Could you give us a little bit of the context for how you would use these? What are people doing? What have they been told to do or asked to do?
Great question. So it's kind of all over the place. The best thing I can tell you, or that sort of supports 99% of what we do, is we deceive them. We bring people in, and it's a deception study where they don't know it's a food safety study at all. We're bringing them in saying, hey, we've got new products, we have new labels, this is a new formulation. Probably my favorite one, the chicken washing study. We had a screener interview as we were recruiting, and we're lucky, we're in an urban setting, right? Like we recruit from about a footprint of almost 2 million people. So you get a wide variety of individuals. So if you do a screener that's like 30 questions long, really we were interested in one question, which was, do you wash your chicken before you handle it or before you cook? Then those people became our sample that we then brought in. But we didn't tell them anything about chicken washing at all. What we said was, there's a new spice blend that there's an entrepreneur working with our food science department on that they would like to market. We'd like to bring you in for you to understand, for us to understand how well you think that spice covers, if the container is right, the holes in it, what's the smell of the spices, and then if you thought that it needed to be added to dry chicken or should it be oiled. Like all of that is a deflection from the actual study, which is, I don't care about that at all, but we had to really go through the motions, like asking post-interview about all of that. But we really wanted to know was, okay, someone who says that they do this at home, if they wash chicken, where does it go? And so at the end, and for all deception studies, and actually I got time. Side note is, I now sit on IRB. The reason is, someone got really mad at us. Like, really, really mad, because they felt that what in his mind, and I get it, it made me feel terrible. In his mind, we deceived him, we did, in a way that was fraudulent. And he actually asked our research assistant, who was on site for this, and I was not, to call the police on us, which we did. I called our IRB coordinator, I was like, what do I do? And she's like, well, you're not gonna get arrested, call the police. It's like, you didn't break the law, you got all this information here. And so we spent about 4 hours with the police officer, with this individual, following up. And at the end of it, our IRB director is phenomenal. She's like, hey, do you think you might want to sit on IRB, because you just went through probably the wildest thing that we've ever had. And your experience in communication and extension would be really helpful. But so, like, contextually, we're constantly deceiving folks, and at the end saying, hey, we deceived you, this is a food safety study. If you don't want to be part of it, we'll remove your data. And you still get your incentive. We pay people somewhere in between $85 and $200 for a couple hours worth of food preparation. So yeah, hopefully Mark might answer your question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we kind of tell people some things and then sometimes not, and it really depends on what the study is. Okay, I'm going to switch gears here and really get into the meat of what I want to tell you about, which is what my experience has been as an extension specialist and educator over the pandemic, and one that sat in a really weird spot, at least from my experience in this. Things in January 2020 started to heat up for me, and the reason is I spent a lot of time supporting the food and agriculture industry around food safety issues about what people do in perceptions. And so just to reflecting on this, give you background, many of our food commodity groups, industries, national groups were really concerned in late January 2020, well before most of the world was interested in SARS-CoV-2 and COVID. And for a couple of reasons. One, I mentioned trade is a big deal. Frozen food industry was in January 2020, was hearing about products being shipped into China, being stopped, and sampled for SARS-CoV-2, like food and food packages. And so our producers, our food manufacturers were like, what? First of all, what is this? Like, we don't know anything about this pathogen, and can it be transmitted on a box? Should we be looking in our food for it? And so I spent most of January gathering up a group of other extension specialists and virologists and food safety professionals to help answer questions. What came out of it is a project that'll finish sometime later this year called Food COVID Net. It's funded by NIFA. NIFA had a rapid response set of grants for COVID and food issues. So we were the first project that was funded by that. We were kind of, through our industry and public health folks, were really pressuring NIFA to be like, there's a lot of questions out here. Someone's going to need to give some money to answer these questions. No one knows what to do. We know a little bit, literally 2 papers on the old SARS from 2004 about can SARS exist on strawberries? And the answer is yes. Can it exist on lettuce? Oh yeah. But that's not the right question. The question is, can you get it from that food or from the packaging? So in February 2020, before the world shut down, we were really pushing for, we need some science answers. We've got a group. There are other groups. There's a great group in Kansas State that's also working on this. There's another group out of the University of Arkansas doing a lot of work in the world of food. And there was a whole bunch of other projects, like all the way down to farms, all the way through the economics and resiliency of the supply chain that were funded. I think in total, in the initial run, there was 17, then there was 4 more, so it's like 21 projects. $30 million or something, not a whole lot. But what NIFA needed from all of the projects was, you need impacts within the first 3 months, because we're in the middle of a pandemic. So we had already started this work. How we started the public communication of this is in February 2020 in the Pacific Northwest, where there were illnesses, like if you remember back to that time, it's really kind of the first set of COVID illnesses that we saw. The food bank in Seattle was turning away food from people who were donating it because they were concerned about SARS-CoV-2 in and on food. And Feeding America, the national organization, reached out to us and said, is there any science on this? Like, is there anything out there that really tells us about this? And it's like, no, but here's all of the literature that we have about these types of viruses, survival, the surrogates for them, and I won't get too much into the details of that, but essentially, the messages, the work, the stuff that we're, if we fast forward 3 years, and I've got a couple of slides on this in a second, is we know a little bit about how, we know that how SARS-CoV-2 is transmitted, and it's shared. It's people being around each other. Touch, eating, no cases. And I wouldn't say no cases 0, but when it comes to touching, if you were to like touch a door handle and then somehow like aspirate that up your nose, and there was a virus particle on it, which is really, it's a respiratory virus, right? So you have to like get it into your respiratory tract. You're looking at, CDC essentially says somewhere between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in a million chance of that happening from touch. But you're at a almost 1 in 5 chance if you're in a shared area. So it's a math issue. But that's how I kind of got into this. One of the things that we found out through the pandemic, and I guess like another lesson for us today, is you can't just tell people you gotta wear a mask. And we learned this working with the industry, and certainly everybody's seen this over the last 3 years. People have to know why, and they have to believe it. And they have to know that the why can change. And that's one of the biggest things that we all dealt with in the world of extension in the midst of this pandemic, is that the science wasn't there, but there was a belief that we should just trust the science. And we kept saying that, but what we didn't say is that the science is going to change. The science always changes. The science gets more fuller as we go on. And that was a real challenge for us in doing extension around this world in the midst of the pandemic. The other thing is that people love a turns out story, right? Like if you look at what works in social media, it's and why, like really, just to give you the background and the communication study and popular media study, why people like the TV shows they like is because they're surprising. There's not, you can't predict from the start how it's going to end, that there's a twist. That's our nature. That's what works in extension as well. And what works in the world of education, there's literature, tons of literature on this. You thought this, turns out here it is. It's something different, it's compelling. And so that was something that we also had to keep in mind when it came to communicating around this idea of food safety in COVID. So we started scouring what was out there in the first couple of months, trying to figure out how we can answer these questions. We had to create a peer-reviewed group because there was no one who knew anything about SARS-CoV-2 on food or food packages. And so we had to go and reach outside of our normal comfort zone, finding respiratory virologists throughout the world, working with WHO on this to better understand and characterize. It was, I'll show you the next slide here in a second. This was, for me, the most exciting time that I've ever had in my career. And I say that, like, obviously from a global health pandemic, it was terrible. But to be at the forefront of this and not have, like, I got into food safety well after people knew what E. coli 15787 was. And well after Listeria, and well after Salmonella. But to be in the middle of this, while universities are shutting down and I'm like moving my everything home, and my kids are home, it was exciting and very adrenaline generating. At the height of this, and I show you this slide, I debated on whether to put this in. But the height of this, I was like doing somewhere in between 15 and 20 news interviews a day because our group was the only one out there trying to answer questions on this. And so I was on like 20 times in a 4-month period. It was, my full-time job became understanding the literature, working with our experts, and really trying to get messages out because people were doing crazy stuff. And let me move forward here a little bit. So I don't know if anyone saw these videos. So first of all, and this is not to out you at all, but how many of you sprayed bleach on your food packaging? When food, you don't have to put your hand up. I'll look at your eyes. Yeah, there's a few. I see a few, but no one wants. Don't turn around. There's a few. How many of you, ordered food and then had it left on your doorstep and left it there for like a while just to make sure the virus was not alive? So there's a few no's, there's a few yeses here. All of the reason why anybody did that is because of this guy, who is a doctor, and I don't know this guy at all, Jeffrey Van Wingen, MD, medical doctor in Michigan, who had a really popular, at the time of the pandemic, a really popular YouTube channel about just anything that you want to ask a doctor, and he'd answer questions about it. And he went on a 9-minute tirade showing people how to disinfect their cereal boxes, and like unsighted, no data, basically saying, you must not touch this stuff. You're gonna get COVID from it. Like, this is well before anybody knew anything about where any of the illnesses were specifically coming from. But this is, if you look at sort of media study, anything that you saw in media about this came from, this is the first place. And it got picked up nationally, internationally, and people started doing it. And then we, our group, and the others ended up going to say, yeah, that's really not risk-based, that's not science-based. That's great, like those are good things, but we're probably deflecting. That's something that is not helping. And so, not really skipping around here. You may or may not see this well, but I'll describe what it is. This is cleaning and disinfection chemical exposures and temporal associations with COVID-19 from the National Poison Data System. Poison Control, national hotline. If you look at time frame, this spike, black spike up the top is 2020. Normally, you get about a couple hundred calls a day. In March of 2020, especially early on, because of the public health messaging and because Extension, truthfully, was not there and not ready for this, because we're working with our public health partners, and nationally and locally, no one knew how to combat this because we're like, everybody was at home and everybody is like trying to deal with their own like pandemic stuff. They've had a 500% increase in chemical exposures, and I would say just based on that video. Really, just the public messaging around that led to like actual illnesses, not COVID illnesses, but actually people getting sick. There are a number of fatalities from this where people were dousing food in bleach because they were concerned about SARS-CoV-2. And so for us, I guess lesson for us is we in the world of extension education have to figure that out. We got to do a better job on how do we be prepared. And there's lots of reasons, that we can kind of rehash why we weren't super prepared on this. Okay, let me move forward again. You've probably seen this slide before. This is the Swiss cheese visualization of pandemic control. It's probably the best visual that I've seen to explain what steps are doing to reduce risk. That there's no magic bullet, silver bullet in this. That every step, and this is what we do in risk management, every set of steps reduces risk slightly, but the virus can still get through. The more Swiss cheese slices you put up, the more likelihood that you don't have a hole that goes through. And so this is really where our project focused. We needed to know, and again, from a food safety standpoint, and I'll even say from an agricultural extension standpoint, we don't have a lot of history or background in things like air ventilation in restaurants or in meat processing plants. Like anybody who works in those areas, or even in, we're definitely dealing with COVID illnesses on farms, in vegetable processing, vegetable packing. No one had data on what's your HVAC look like? What kind of air exchange you have? And those things really, really matter, more than the cleaning and sanitizing aspects. And so I think one of the other big lessons for us was better understanding, it goes back to that tenet earlier, better understanding what people do all the time, thinking about the system in a holistic way. We really want to do a good job in the world of in food safety, pandemic management. Okay, so just to, that's where we were at. We did a lot of stuff. The project goal was really to backfill in all the data that we didn't have. And so we worked with, I'll show you the next slide, really integrated nature of this project. Had a group that was meeting on a weekly basis from all the major commodity groups throughout the US, food processing, different, we got on a conference call that our extension group ran to understand what problems do you have right now, what kind of data do you need to make decisions. And I'll tell you, like, again, reflecting on this, there was a lot of stuff that people wasted money on that we couldn't combat quick enough. And I'll give you one example that you'll still see when you walk around any city, and that's plexiglass barriers. It was something that we thought, I shouldn't say we, that there was a couple of folks at WHO said, you should probably do this. And that became well, everybody go out and get plexiglass. And it wasn't science-based, and it was working on this weekly basis with our commodity organizations and stakeholders. They're like, is this doing anything? And the virologists in the room were like, I can't see how it would be doing anything. Yeah, we don't think so. And the real struggle here at a macro level is that our public health world, as they were walking through and investigating, were expecting to see it. And they thought, okay, WHO says that you should probably do this. We don't know if there's any data. Put them up. And it became a real, like, we missed it. And just to give you a sense, we work really closely with a grocery retailer, Delhaize. I'll hold Delhaize, a big international grocery store. So here in the Southeast, they own Food Line, they also own Hannaford's and Sweet Bay, a whole bunch of different places. But they're like maybe the 5th largest retail chain in the world, or retail conglomerate in the world. They estimated that plexiglass cost them $60 million in a month. And it was not risk-based. So I guess another reflection here is, how do we better make risk decisions, and how do we combat when there's an international agency that says maybe you should do this, and without data. It was something that we really focus on. Right now, just to give you a sense, we've looked at sort of building a database of all the literature that we know about food contact surfaces, food systems, and COVID. There's about 800 papers that have been published since really February 2020, because things were coming out in preprint at that time, that have some impact on what we do to help us make better decisions. But the thing that I'll say here, and the reflection from an extension education standpoint, is that database had to be made, right? Like, we didn't have anything, it didn't exist somewhere. So it took us time to build this up. One of the other things that we're doing in our project, and again, great folks at Kansas State, Arkansas are doing similar things. We're trying to better understand how SARS-CoV-2 persists in environments, and can it transfer? Because that's really the question. Someone coughs on a frozen, bag of frozen strawberries, and it gets shipped. I mean, I'll tell you, the data right now, it's there. Like, if the virus is in the environment and it settles on that bag, you'll find it 8 months later. But is it a viable virus? Can it transfer? That's where the risk goes way down. And so one of the things that we've really struggled with on the extension side of things, and this is really with regulators and buyers of products, is really trying to educate what it means if you find something via PCR on a package versus, is there a risk to a consumer? And quick answer is, there's no zero risk, but it's really like 1 in 10 billion chance. And then the biggest thing that our group at NC State focused on was a real big focus on outreach and extension. So I'm going to tell you a couple of things on that here. So one thing is, again, we organized, I think we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're trying to get information out, everybody's sitting at home doing Zoom. So what do? We organize a bunch of webinars. Sometimes we got 300 people to the webinar, sometimes we got 3,000 people to the webinar, kind of depended on what the topic was. But our net was through all of these commodity organizations, National Restaurant Association, everybody out there, trying to get the actual experts who are working at the forefront of this to talk directly to our stakeholders about decisions. And so we did airflow ventilation, environmental sampling, international and trade perspectives, vaccine hesitancy, something that I knew nothing about. Not a vaccine person, but our world of food needed to know, how do I convince somebody that this is something that they should think about? Lessons learned, what do we do with high-touch surfaces? And yeah, sometimes we're over 2,000, 3,000 participants. Okay, the other thing, Joseph mentioned, I host a couple of podcasts. The world of podcasting changed in the pandemic. As someone who does this a lot, I do 2 podcasts. One, Food Safety Talk. It's like rambling. Like, I mean, it's like no, legit. It's like this talk, but with another guy. Yeah, it's like 2 hours long. It's like, we're gonna talk about food safety things. We're gonna pontificate about it. That was where the world of like our listeners were before the pandemic. Then we got a whole other world of listeners that happened right at the start of this, and they wanted real small snippets. So we might talk about like, hey, let's spend an hour talking about why SARS-CoV-2 can't be in food. And they're like, yeah, great. Can you give me 8 minutes on whether I can go eat at a restaurant? Is it risky or not? All I want to know is that. And you tell me what you think. And so Don, my co-host, is a professor at Rutgers University, Don Chapman. That's what we do to give you some of our recent greatest hits. There was some pasta that showed up in the woods in New Jersey. You might have seen this. Someone, like, now we've created this world where people are just like, is that risky or not? If I find pasta in the woods, can I eat it? Risky, just so you know. Super sweaty celebrity chefs. You know, someone else is like, I was watching, Top Chef, they're dripping sweat into food and serving. Is that risky or not? And so again, from our extension standpoint, what we're trying to do is connect directly with people who are not food safety people at all. They just like podcasts and answering these questions. And then my maybe favorite recent one is mammoth meatballs, because this has an animal agricultural impact. Has anybody heard of mammoth meatballs at all? All right, so I see one nod. So essentially, there are some animal breeders that found DNA from a mammoth that was viable, that they could then sequence, recreate, and then put into lab cultured meat, and make meatballs with it. Now, they did not let people eat them. Does anybody want to guess why? It's not for E. coli, it's not like some prehistoric E. coli reason. So over time, our bodies change, and we're unsure, the world of allergy is unsure whether people have intolerances or allergies to the proteins in mammoth meat, because it's different. So it's closely related to elephant meat, and so these are the types of questions that people ask. And you can see here, so anyway, we decided this one, I think one of us said it was risky and one of us not risky, and that's kind of the hard part, is like two experts disagree sometimes. I'm the more risk averse, just so you know. Don is like, it's fine. He's a microbial modeler, so he does a bunch of growth stuff. This one, super sweaty celebrity chefs, gross, not risky. Pasta in the woods in New Jersey, risky. But since the pandemic, this grew immensely. So just to give you, and again, I'm not going to share this other than to give you an idea of a model. We get somewhere in between 6,000 and 7,000 downloads for every Risky or Not episode. Food Safety Talk, long, sort of traditional, about 3,000. And two different, because you can track IP addresses, there's lots of data that you can do. It's different audiences, totally different audiences that exist in these two worlds. So another thing that we focused on as well from our extension outreach efforts was we were asked by our state, really by the State Department of Health, to come up with a certification program of getting restaurant employees back to work, so restaurants could open, because tourism and restaurants is behind agriculture is our second largest economy in North Carolina. And it's summer, and people want to go to the Outer Banks and could go to a restaurant at that point. So we worked with governor's office as well as with the Department of Health and Human Services to develop a certification program for this. And again, reflection, as Joseph and Jay asked me to do, we went from no program to like a certification program in 6 weeks. 3 full-time people is all they did. All asynchronous, developing videos, working with people that we could get as experts for this. And one of my former graduate students, Dr. Gabby Ortega, is here in the front row. Gabby came in a couple years later to evaluate this work, because in the midst of this, all we had to do was get something out. And we didn't know whether it worked or whether it didn't work. And some of the real, I think, interesting insights from Gabby's work that we've just learned in the last couple of months is that, I told you shared air is the biggest thing that mattered. The thing that stuck is people are cleaning and sanitizing high-touch surfaces still. And so, truthfully, from a risk and economic standpoint, we missed the mark. The things that stuck with people are things that might be good for public health, might be controlling norovirus, but they're certainly not controlling SARS-CoV-2. But things like social distancing, air ventilation, like totally has not stuck. So it's really interesting to see that long-term effect. And you can see this early on, some pictures I took early on in the pandemic, like couldn't get condiments, right? So this is, hi, our condiment station is temporarily moved behind the counter. If you need sugar, cream, napkins, silverware, please ask our staff, because there was concern of hands touching common things. And now, 2 years later, 3 years later, we know that that's such a low risk issue that in fact, the person going to get the product, talking with someone is much higher risk than this. Or thank you for using credit cards or contactless payment for this during this time. Really, the idea, the tenet behind that is that cash can be a source of transmission and really can't. So we did a whole bunch of outreach on this. We developed 168 different resources in 4 different languages. This is, Dave, we stopped sort of tracking this really because this isn't even it's not a thing anymore. But back about 18 months ago, we had 42,000 web page views. These things appeared in over 1,000 media stories, links to them, nationally and internationally. We shared these. You can see this. We gave these out to our extension partners all throughout the country and said, don't, like, brand them how you want. We don't care, just use this information. It doesn't have to say NC State, just do it, which is something that truthfully made our extension director not super happy about, but he got over it. But that was the big thing for us, was really pushing this out. I skipped over this, but on the Count on Me NC program, we spread that throughout the country as well. We have data on how many certificates we've done here in North Carolina. We did 14,000 certificates. Those are great outputs. What are the impacts? That's what Gabby really investigated, and I think people are still cleaning and sanitizing, right? But then we shared that nationally as well, and haven't really tracked any of that material that's out there. Okay, I'm going to switch a little bit again, and I guess give you some of my next lessons. I love having like an hour and a half. This is great. Just if I can just talk, it's like a safety talk. I was a little nervous this morning. I was like, I don't know if I can fill this time frame, but here we are. Okay, so big things to take away for us. Storytelling matters. If you want good extension education outputs, it's not just here, do this. It's about connecting that, and this is well rooted in the literature. And this is a tenet of what we do in our group and what I try to really work with other extension specialists around. But so does science. Science matters. So it's got to be a story. The actual data matters. You can't hide the data that doesn't agree. You have to talk about why it doesn't agree. That's one of the big things that we've learned throughout the pandemic. But trust has changed, and I don't know where this is going. So again, I think we're all in a spot here. I'm going to explain to you what this is. It's a paper that was published in 2020. It's the best one out there. It divides public trust in the US by Democrats, Republicans, and independents, so please don't read into that. It's just literally the best paper that has investigated this. And I'll highlight overall. So this is public trust based on numerous surveys over the course of different data points within the pandemic and afterwards. And you can see that if we look at overall, the sentiment around trust in scientists and public health was at about 83% before the pandemic hit, before we started doing polls. Overall, it's not quite eclipsed 80, it's dropped, and I would say that it's a significant drop. Where things are really, really problematic for me is this is the line of those who identify as independents in our voting system, is that the drop from independents went from 80 down almost to 71% in trust. So it's great, still 71% trust things. But that's a 9% drop of the most engaged and I would say loudest individuals in our social media space based on it. That's a challenge for us. And it's about, like you heard Ray and Andy talk about it yesterday if you were here, that's about trust in all sides. It's not just trust related to the pandemic, but it's eroded the trust in our national public health agencies, CDC, local public health. I work really closely with local public health across the US. The turnover rate used to be about 20% a year in the local public health departments. 3,100 local public health departments in the US. The turnover rate from 2020 to now is 62%. 62% of people are going to leave their job within a year in a local public health department. And it's because of really trust in public health in general. And that local legislators have a lot of problems with what public health is doing, that trying to do things within a community has gotten tougher. Full disclosure on this, we've not seen how bad that's going to be going forward. Those are our, in my world of food safety, our partners, and every year there's a whole bunch of new ones at a much higher rate than we've ever experienced before. Next thing I'll just highlight here, how does this reflect Save Paper about COVID specifically? And again, we can transfer this to any new thing that we deal with. If you have no trust in science, if you're in that, you've dropped, you're way less likely to wear masks, way less likely to do social distancing, way less likely to do contact tracing. High trust in science, much more compliant with those practices. And so to me, that's something that we have to grapple with. It's something that, Stephen Knapp didn't really have to grapple with, right? Science was here. It was helping us move forward. As extension specialists and extension scientists moving forward, it's something that's really, really going to be an issue for us. I had a chance in the middle of the pandemic to do something kind of cool that demonstrated this to me. So randomly, kind of out of the blue, anybody seen the show Moonshiners before on Discovery? All right. Anybody seen the show Moonshiners Smoke Ring? No, because no one watched it. It was a spin-off of Moonshiners, and again, these are people, so I'm going to say words that I don't even know what I'm saying, but there's a guy named Tickle, and Tickle hosted a barbecue competition, and so in the middle of the pandemic, I got a call from the producers of the show to say, hey, we need someone to come out to our show for one reason, and that is because, and this is where I felt this lack of trust, or changing trust. Producer said, I'm concerned that if anything happens on our show that is negative towards COVID or negative food safety, that it's going to put us into a canceled group. We get calls on shows when people do stuff like sweating into food, and I need somebody who knows about this to come out and tell us if we're doing something wrong, to stop it so it doesn't make it to the public, right? And so I got to know the showrunner really well over the course of this show, and I talked to him about why, and he said, I've been doing reality TV food shows for 20 years, and nothing mattered. We could slaughter a pig, take all the pig's blood, rub it all over our faces, and no one would care. But at the start of the pandemic, all of a sudden, all of our engagement online was unhealthy, about sanitation, about virus control. And he said the viewer in the public has changed. The trust in what we're doing has changed. And so that was it really was really striking to me. So I mean, it was cool. I got to eat a whole bunch of barbecue. I got to see some very cool competitions, but my job was literally to stand behind these cameramen and producers, and if someone did something, I had full authority to go in and be like, hey, you can't do that. We gotta reshoot that because they didn't wash their hands before they did that. Or they were like coughing at each other. And so it was cool to be part of that. I'd never seen, but the other big thing that I took away from that is that was one showrunner, one director of the show that did this. As we got to talk about this more and more, his message to me was, yeah, no one else is really interested in this. They're just gonna ignore everything that's happening out there. But our production company doesn't. We don't want to be in the public fray on this. And so there's lots of times where you think about like extend this to the world of agriculture, food systems in general. You look at food shows, sometimes we like to get better messaging out there. It's entertainment, it's really hard to get it there. This work, again, it was easy, but it was long days. Like, we were there from 5 a.m. till midnight, 5 days in a row, shooting. And so to get that information out there takes commitment. I wouldn't do it full time, I did it for the experience. Yeah?
Did you have to stop them often?
Yeah. I mean, often's relative.
Yeah.
I probably stopped, I would say 5 times per episode. Yeah. Yeah. Enough that was like, oh, I'm glad I'm here. Okay. So I think the last thing that I'll talk about here is about the world of engagement. So we're really good in extension, education, delivering information out there to our stakeholders about what you should do. Talked a little bit about giving them the why. What we're not good at, but the pandemic has changed, is a constant back and forth engagement. I've had to curb my Twitter use because the engagement is too high. Like, not, and that, again, I don't want that to sound conceited at all. It's just, I can get lost in 30 or 40 questions a week from just people on the internet who want to ask questions, and I want to give them complete answers, and I want to know more about what they're doing. That back and forth engagement, if I think about where our extension agents here in North Carolina or extension educators in other states are, it's not just about, hey, I'm going to put on a workshop for this. It's that they are learning, and we're learning how to build capacity over the course of the pandemic for them to be in multiple conversations back and forth all the time. And that's where I think the world of extension has gone. And it's really, if we think back to, go back 100 years here in North Carolina, if you know sort of anything about the history, it probably looks very similar in other states as well. The history of extension here started in family consumer sciences with home demonstration clubs and tomato canning, where it was all about engagement. It was all not just hands-on, but it was, hey, let's all do this together. I'll be here. Want me to come back in a couple of days to look at this? And we had a way to be able to do that. Over the course of 100 years, we got into one-way communication delivery. Really, really good at that. Putting out outputs, putting on informational workshops. But what we've learned over the course of the pandemic, at least in my world, is that there's more need for that engagement, because that person-to-person engagement that people did have a while ago may not be nearly the same as what they used to have. I'm going to end on this, and I'd be happy to take some questions. My philosophy, again, through experience and mentorship and really just gleaning things from other disciplines, has been to be a disruptor in our space of extension. And I really think that it's hard for those who are new to our field or to the world of agricultural extension education to feel safe to be a disruptor. Talk to lots of people that are relatively new in their career, and there is a tendency for us as more mature individuals in the system to be like, yeah, here's a way that I've done it before. Here, try to fit this model. And I want to encourage us here to really give our extension agents, our extension educators, our extension faculty, our faculty in education, everybody, this view of disruption. Anyway, I should tell you what this picture is. This is a mosh pit from a punk rock concert. And I look at, I'm beyond Neil Young, Joseph, I could rattle off all the punk shows I've been to as well. But I look at this as disruption, disrupting the mainstream world of what we've done in music. I think of the successful world of where we're going to have to go in extension is not to assimilate to how we have done it. It's how do we figure out how to do more podcasts, how to be engaged on TikTok. We have a real challenge with TikTok, which is, I'll speak from my standpoint. We can't use our state our state equipment to be on TikTok. And if I put out a TikTok video on food safety, I can get 1 million engagements in 2 days. If I put out an extension fact sheet, I get 30 downloads. We've got to figure out, and again, that's not it's not specifically to TikTok, but we've got to figure out as individuals in extension, how do we continue to disrupt and be at that forefront and not really force our folks to try to assimilate to models that we've used in the past. That's the end. All the stuff in here, obviously you all know this, being from academic institutions. Everything that I talked about today, it's not my world. There's so many people that are behind the work that I do, whether it's postdocs or former graduate students or current graduate students or people that work in our laboratories. And so I just want to recognize them for this as well, because I couldn't give you this talk without them. So thank you very much for the time. We've got 7 minutes left for questions, if there are any questions out there. Right, Joseph? Go ahead.
Good question.
Yeah.
So we missed in your dissecting your Twitter.
Gosh.
Just curious,
This could be interesting.
What's your secrets on how you grew your followership at that level? What strategies do you have for us to be better at that?
Yeah. So Robert's question was, how did I grow my followership in Twitter? So for me in Twitter, I don't know, what am I at, about 5,000 followers or something. Yeah. I'm not huge by any sense, but there's a lot of food safety individuals that follow me, and non-food safety folks. So a couple things. One is just content, and like I said, I really had to dial this back. If you go back probably 8 months, and I took a role as an administrator 18 months ago, and that's really slowed down my Twittering. But as an extension specialist, it was just being out there every day, reading what things were out there, even just sending out quick tweets of hey, this is an interesting story, sharing that, following people, retweeting them, engaging with them. It's a great question because I can't tell you the total amount of time that I would spend in a day on Twitter. It just became part of what I did all the time. It was there in the background. And sometimes I had to think about stuff a little bit, put out a tweet storm of 5 or 6 to explain something. The growth, a lot of it happened at the start of the pandemic when I was really visible in these media interviews. I cultivated a lot of conversations with media members. So there's probably, of that 5,000, there's probably 200 that are food and agriculture writers or journalists in this world, and I kind of straddle this weird spot where they look at my podcast sometimes as like, oh, you're like in the journalism world, because we talk about news and food safety. And I look at it as I'm in the extension world, and so there are times where I utilize those contacts to get information out. They retweet stuff all the time, and so so some of them, like some of my followers that I know well off Twitter are in the like hundreds of thousands of followers, and so having them amplify messages has really helped.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's a great question. I wish I knew how it happened more than that. Other questions? Yeah, Mark.
Ben, this is more of a comment than a question. I'm in my own personal centric worldview, I'm always amazed at the number of people that I meet who don't have any idea that extension exists. And I just assume that because I grew up with that knowledge, everybody should know that. And in a sort of morbid way, I'm gratified when they have a problem that extension has a solution for, and I can refer them to extension. And I'm often met with the response that I thought that was for farmers. If they knew anything about extension, if they had any basis of previous knowledge, it's always, well, but I'm not a farmer.
Yeah.
And so to me, this presentation really hits the target of what the Knapp seminar ought to be. So first of all, kudos to the committee for selecting you, and then for you to deliver this, because I think it's a perfect example of how extension can be seen as a resource. Because the bigger the problem, the more people who are impacted, the more people then get driven to extension to recognize what value we have within our current structure. And when I think about food and nutrition being central to the core tenets of what extension started out to be, this is like the perfect 21st century example of what extension programming can look like. And my question was going to be, have you seen any sort of an uptick in the number of people referencing extension outside of this? But I think that's probably too difficult of anybody would know whether or not there's a greater demand for extension based resources or that kind of thing. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to the question, but I think that's something that would be, it's definitely got lots of valid, it would be valid to know and to see how that's changed over time. I will say, one thing that I've experienced, and it's happened both in the world of agriculture, when I was in graduate school, when I was back in Canada, when I came to NC State, is that we often suffer from a little bit of like, no one knows who we are, and it sometimes demoralizing, right? And the mentorship that I was given was, don't worry about that, just go do it. Like, people, if you're out there, you're doing this stuff, and you're making sure, like, when you're on CNN, you say that you're a food safety specialist with North Carolina Cooperative Extension, that, that's, you're doing your job of getting that brand out there. If people notice it, great. If no one notices it, just keep doing it. And know that the information that you're putting out there, the work that we're doing, like, matters. But I'm with you. Like, I know it can feel like, well, I wish you would know about this piece, but I guess I just come at it as, that's okay. People don't know about stuff all the time, and it only matters when it hits them, right? Like, and if there's a solution that's out there, now all of a sudden they're into the world. And yeah, and I think that's something that we work on with our agents as well, because they feel the same way. Like, I'm here, I'm paid to do this work, but they're going to some other agency that may not have the best information, or some other person, and it's like, it's okay. We just keep going. We're all doing it like together.
I'm really proud that you're on CNN. I mean, representing extension, because I doubt there's many extension professionals that find themselves on CNN or any national broadcast.
It's fleeting. No longer on CNN. It's gone. Yeah. But for a while, yeah. Thank you. Yes.
In a world of instant gratification, right? We have to have the answers like exactly right now. Like 2 seconds ago was too late.
Yeah.
How do we help consumers understand that science takes time? And does that come up in your podcast in terms of explaining to folks the actual reality of being able to be able to make those kind of like, well, you know what, maybe we should have told everybody to buy plexiglass because we could have taken a little bit of time first. And that $60 million that was spent on plexiglass could have actually fed, or whatever, right?
Yep. Yeah. I don't know if there's a magic answer to that. I think it's coming back to and constantly hammering the message that this is what we know right now and this is evolving. That part in a lot of places was left out. And in fact, I saw it in the post-vaccine situation more than anything, which was when people got surprised that we had illnesses with vaccinated individuals, right? In the world of vaccine, in the world of messaging, it was like this, all vaccine, no vaccine has 100% coverage. There's always going to be breakthrough cases. There's always going to be, infection, but not illness. But the messaging that we had early on around vaccine hesitancy was, go get a vaccine because it's going to fix our problem. And so I think our job in the world of extension, and I push this even into the world of agriculture education, is constantly coming back to none of this stuff's none of it's 100%. It's always evolving. We need to revisit this at all times. People are. That's what we're doing at land-grant institutions, and that science is a progressive process. There's not an end point. So we do talk about that a lot on our podcast. We even talk in Risky or Not, where we hold ourselves to, we've got to give an answer in 12 minutes, and we're constantly looking for papers that are close to this. And sometimes it's like an asterisk. It's like, there's no data on this. But if we look at the literature for your specific question, I think it's not risky for it. But there's, we could get into a whole challenge of public understanding of science, the foundation, not just the trust, but just understanding how the process works as a real issue for us, pandemic and post-pandemic. But I really appreciate your comment. Yeah. Well, sorry. Joseph says one more question, but maybe not. It's 10:02. One more question.
So how do we buffer scientists from policymakers? Because we look at how much influence policymakers have to get something done now. They have to react quickly. How do we buffer our scientists in order to protect them and their ability to do something?
That's a great question. Half of my mind is to not buffer them, but to train scientists what policymakers do and why they're asking, so they can make those decisions better. I think that as someone who came through the process of science, I never got into any training around policymaking at all. And now, other than this and department head stuff, the only food safety stuff I do is around policymaking. But I hear your question. I think it's kind of, for me, twofold: is explaining what it is, and then working with our administration to be that buffer, and helping, even working with our industry partners who are often feeling, in my case, the pressure from policymakers to do something about food safety, to have them work with them to be that buffer as well. But I would say that my long-term goal would be to flip that, and scientists are much closer to helping policymakers make better decisions. And I know from my colleagues in the world of food safety, it's not a comfortable spot to be in. So yeah, I don't know. That's a weird answer.
Yeah, maybe buffer wasn't the exact word for that, but being able to engage the policymaker into allow the discussion and discourse to, say, policymaker, you may be wrong, I may be wrong.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's something that we should be doing sort of all along. We work with, at NC State, a legislative liaison who helps us get to those and respond to questions. And that was someone who I didn't know for the first 10 years of my career, that even was a function at our university. So yeah, utilizing those, those lobbyists to make those questions. That's his job. Yeah.
All right.
But great question. Thank you.
Dr. Chapman, thank you very much for your vision, your leadership, and your expertise, which reflects that of Seaman Knapp. And we hope that you have fond memories of the American Association for Agricultural Education Conference. We certainly do. We've learned not to eat pasta in the woods and how to wash our chicken, and so we appreciate you again. Please accept these mementos on our behalf. Thank you all very much for being here.